What's good? It's Woog. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. We've got Chris Colbert, 15 wins, 0 losses, taking on Tugstsogt King Tug Nyambayar, 12 wins and 1 loss. Chris Colbert is from the BK, Brooklyn, New York. King Tug is from Mongolia. Now, Chris Colbert doesn't have a ton of professional experience. In fact, neither of these guys have a long track record. They both turned pro in 2015. King Tug Nyambayar, however, was an actual Olympic silver medalist and has fought better competition in the professional ranks than Chris Colbert. That one loss for King Tug came against Gary Russell Jr., the current WBC champion at 126 Featherweight, who boasts probably the fastest hands in the sport pound for pound. I've felt that way for a while. It is that blinding type of hand speed that Gary Russell Jr. flaunts. And you know what? Chris Colbert also appears to have some electrifying hand speed. In fact, a lot of people are kind of likening his style to Pernell Sweepy Whitaker. Now, I don't think he's nearly the defensive fighter that Pernell Sweepy Whitaker, the late Pernell Sweepy Whitaker, was. Whitaker is one of the greatest defenders of all time. Truly one of the pound for pound generational talents of his era. But Chris Colbert has been showing a ton of promise. He's actually probably PBC's, or at least one of PBC's most hyped prospects. He's only 24 years old. King Tug is 29 years old. This is orthodox versus orthodox, so no southpaws here. I think pound for pound, King Tug has a heavier punch. Out of Chris Colbert's 15 wins, 6 have come by knockout. But Chris Colbert has been fighting mostly at 130, super featherweight, or junior lightweight, super featherweight 130, and has even dabbled at 135. On the other hand, Nyambayar actually competed in the Olympics as a flyweight. That's way down there. And has fought most of his professional career at featherweight 126. It was only in his very last fight, after his loss to Gary Russell Jr., that Nyambayar went up from 126 to 130. There he fought Bout, and he won via split decision. So it was a close fight in his 130-pound fight. And in that fight, Nyambayar dropped Bout twice, once in the first round, once in the second round, and then after that, Bout pretty much fought him a very even fight where you could basically split the rounds going forward after the second round. It was a split decision where one of the judges had Bout winning the fight 115 to 111. Boxing Scene actually scored the fight 115 to 111 Nyambayar, so they actually did have them splitting the rounds after the second round. And that was actually Bout's first loss. So we've got one guy who's showing off, like I said, electrifying hand speed, doesn't have a ton of power, but he hits you so cleanly and isn't afraid to lead. He's a total showman. He comes in, his nickname is Prime Time, and so he's come in the ring with tributes to Deion Sanders. Colbert dyes his hair like a different color for just about every fight. Total showman, and his fights are very fun to watch. His style is, hit and not get hit. And basically, like I said, he's fast enough where he doesn't even need to wait for you to throw the first punch so he can try to counter that. I mean, he will do that if you press the issue, but he's fast enough where he could just let a straight lead go. And I mean lead right hand. You've got to be very either super technical or super gifted and blessed with speed to be able to deliver those without first setting it up with a jab or feints and so forth. He could just, you just got hit and couldn't even do anything about it. Rare talent in that case. However, if you see Chris Colbert pushed beyond the first couple of rounds, because he does have a couple early knockouts. He knocked Miguel Beltran Jr. out in the first round. But in Colbert's last fight versus Jaime Arboleda, Chris Colbert started the fight looking special once again, but after those first couple of rounds, it started to hit a more even pace. Not that Arboleda was winning a bunch of the rounds. I think that Arboleda won the 4th round, so Colbert was still winning the rounds, but you could tell that he was being involved in longer exchanges. He wasn't able to totally dictate like the terms of the exchange, when they exchange and when the exchange is over, and then he could separate and then recalibrate. There was a little bit more trench work where the speed becomes less of an issue if both guys have their guns flying in close quarters. Because yes, Colbert is going to still be landing some nice, clean shots, but he's also going to be taking some more incoming fire himself. Now, one thing that he is also blessed with, aside from hand speed, is having an unusually long reach for the division. He's got a 71-inch reach. This fight is, again, at 130. And for some context, Errol Spence, fighting 3 divisions up, has a 72-inch reach. Floyd Mayweather, 72-inch reach. Fought everywhere from 130, 135 to 147, even dabbled at 154. 72-inch reach. So even though Chris Colbert and King Tug Nyambayar are both 5'8" tall, Chris Colbert has a 71-inch reach compared with Nyambayar's 66-inch reach. So that's a huge gap. And if Colbert's able to leverage that and to make Nyambayar keep following him and chasing him, but keep sticking the jab out, so you continuously have Nyambayar trying to work around this jab to try to get inside, then that could be a big issue here. Now, Nyambayar, like, for instance, when he was fighting Gary Russell Jr., who has, again, some of the fastest hands, probably even faster than Colbert's hands, maybe. Gary Russell Jr. is now in his approaching his mid-30s, so I don't know if he's as fast as he was. He looks as fast as he was. And by the way, I criticize Gary Russell Jr.'s career opponent choices a lot, especially since he won the WBC title. But if you look in retrospect, he is the only guy to dish out a loss at this point to King Tug Nyambayar. And in retrospect, he did also beat Joseph Jojo Diaz, who we saw beat Tevin Farmer pretty recently to earn a share of the 130 title that he then lost, he being Jojo Diaz, on the scale, leading up to his fight against Shavkat Rakhimov, which ended up being a draw. So a couple of these wins for Gary Russell Jr. are aging nicely, but I would still love to see him fight just one more often and also fight some of the elite in his weight class. But another story for another video. But Gary Russell Jr., for as fast as his hands are, he is a very short fighter. He is about 5'4", 5'4 and a half. That's about an inch shorter than Gervonta Tank Davis. And Russell's reach is 64 inches. But when Russell fought Nyambayar, who even has a greater reach and is taller than him, it was Russell who was able to get off first, and he would hit Nyambayar with a jab repeatedly. And Russell Jr. is a southpaw, so he would hit him with the right jab and then sometimes do one of those fast, lightning fast 3-punch combinations and try to get out of the way. Nyambayar was looking for opportunities to counter with the straight right, because Nyambayar does have a money right hand. I mean, it's not a detach you from your senses powerful right hand, but it does get some guys out of there, and it definitely does have some significant impact. So he was able to win a couple rounds versus Russell and to find his moments to catch Russell with that right hand, and when he doubles up on the left hook, because usually fighters are trying to recognize punch patterns. So if you're able to, like, say, read that the guy's going to throw a left and a right, so you block here, block here. Well, if the guy then doubles up on the left hand, that's throwing your punch pattern recognition off. And so some of the success that Nyambayar was able to have against the super short but very elusive and super crafty and gifted Gary Russell, the little bit of success that Nyambayar was having against Russell was when he would do things like double up on the left hook to throw Gary Russell's punch pattern recognition off. Here, he's going to have to do some of that doubling up on either jabs or left hooks to try to get inside of the long Chris Colbert reach. And Nyambayar was trying to break Russell down mentally by, Russell would hit him with a couple shots, but then Nyambayar would immediately try to cut the ring off and engage him again, basically telling him with his body language, I ain't going nowhere, and I'm going to be in your face looking to hit you with some hard shots, so you better stay on this treadmill and be able to swim without getting wet, to quote the late great Nassim Richardson. Hall of Fame trainer. So some of those things that King Tug Nyambayar was looking to do against Gary Russell Jr., he's also going to have to try to do against Chris Colbert, because Chris Colbert, at least in the early rounds, he will get off, and he will get off first, and he will get off cleanly, and I expect him to hit Nyambayar repeatedly, cleanly, early. So if Nyambayar is able to kind of weather that in the first couple rounds, which I expect him to, he seems to be pretty durable. So I expect him to cut the ring off after Chris Colbert has success with the first, second, or third combination. And Chris Colbert's going to, in his Sweet Pea Whitaker stance, kind of, with his hands down, looking to move his upper body a lot, and then just kind of pot shot, move, and then sometimes let his hands go when it's safe to throw combinations. The thing is, Nyambayar wants Colbert to open up with more and more punches, because the more punches that Colbert throws, the more opportunities Nyambayar is going to have to counter with that hard right hand. So the question is Chris Colbert anywhere nearly as good as he appears to be against his lesser competition? And is he going to be able to hold up against the pressure of Nyambayar, even though Nyambayar, again, is basically stepping up in weight here from 126 to 130. He's going to be the pressure fighter. I expect him to be the pressure fighter. Is Colbert going to be able to hold up against that pressure as well as Gary Russell Jr. was able to hold up against it? Because Gary Russell Jr. was able to win the vast majority of the rounds in his decision win over King Tug, who, by the way, was once trained, or for a while, trained by a pretty famous trainer and part of the PBC broadcast for a lot of the fights, Joe Goosen. So, King Tug's gotten great tutelage. He is obviously, like I said, an Olympic medalist. So, he's the real deal here. And it's going to be interesting to see how this electrifying, gifted prospect, Colbert, is going to, weather the storm or kind of keep King Tug at bay. Because I feel like King Tug is going to be there for the middle rounds. So then you've got yourself an interesting fight, because when Chris Colbert fought Arboleda in his last fight, he did have a lot of difficulty, even in some of the rounds that he was winning, because he was just getting tagged in some of these long exchanges. I don't know if he could just afford to do the same thing here against King Tug, who not only applies pressure, but it's an intelligent pressure. He's a pretty smart fighter. He himself is able to read patterns very well and to time the opponent's movements, where, you throw a feint to get the guy to react, then throw a punch, that type of thing. Chris Colbert does a good amount of feinting himself, so that's going to be interesting just watching the feint battle between the two. Again, Chris Colbert's got that special speed where in a lot of those, who's going to be the quick draw and who's going to throw the punch, Chris Colbert will throw the punch first in a lot of these cases. But when the speed starts to slow down just a little bit as you get into the middle rounds, I expect Chris Colbert's mettle, mettle, his fortitude, everything like that, to get tested. And I think it's going to be a difficult task for Colbert, but I do expect him. Prediction-wise, I'll go with Colbert via decision. I don't think he's going to stop King Tug, and I think that King Tug is going to have his moments. Look, if Chris Colbert just blows King Tug out and wins just about every round, give or take, 1 or 2 rounds, then that will catapult Chris Colbert into, okay, this guy might really be special territory. By the way, I said that Chris Colbert is arguably PBC's greatest prospect. You could add Jaron Boots Ennis to that list, right? But yeah, if Chris Colbert is able to handle King Tug, for instance, like Jaron Boots Ennis was able to handle and stop Sergey Lipinets, who Mikey Garcia couldn't even stop, then yeah, Chris Colbert is catapulted at that point. I don't think he's going to stop King Tug, but I do think that the size will matter in this one. The fact that King Tug is fighting only his second fight at 130 against a guy who has a tremendous reach advantage. I expect Colbert to be the faster starter, probably win at least 2 of the first 3 rounds, unless, King Tug just catches him with a straight punch like Kosazu caught Zab Judah when they had their showdown at 140, Zab Judah's first loss in his career. Shocking, iconic knockdown, also because of the way that Zab Judah got up too quickly and did the chicken leg. That was basically viral before viral. Cedric the Entertainer, the comedian, actually roasted that get-up attempt by Zab Judah in, I think, the Kings of Comedy. But yeah, if Colbert doesn't just get caught with something stupid from King Tug, I expect him to win the early rounds, I expect King Tug to win some of the middle rounds, and I expect Chris Colbert to have to dig deep to finish strong to win at least like 2 of the last 3 rounds to earn the biggest win of his career. But yeah, the more I look at this, the more, I mean, it's an interesting matchup because you know that King Tug is a quality fighter, and it's just always a treat to be able to watch surging prospects when they're in the different rungs of the ladder getting tested at different levels. This will be no different, and this in a lot of ways to me is more compelling than even some of the championship matchups that we see. Very interested to see how this plays out, but right now I'm taking Chris Colbert via decision in a competitive but clear decision win. But yeah, let me know your thoughts on this. Please leave your comments in the comments. By the way, who do they match Colbert up with if he wins this fight? Because PBC's stable is not deep at 130. I know Floyd Mayweather just said after the Gervonta Davis dramatic knockout win over Mario Barrios up at 140, Floyd Mayweather said PBC and his, and their whole team have a deep roster. They have a lot of quality fighters at 130, 135, at 140. I just don't see it. You could look at Ring Magazine's top 10 in any one of those divisions and see that it's kind of slim pickings at an elite level for PBC in those divisions. Other divisions, it's fantastic. 154, 147, not going to argue with anyone there. Hell, at 168, they've got Caleb Plant, David Benavidez, and it looks like Canelo is going to have to come over to unify all 4 168-pound titles and become undisputed. So yeah, there are divisions where PBC's got it rocking and rolling. I just don't think 130 and 135 are that. So it's going to be interesting how they matchmake for Chris Colbert going forward. I mean, he was supposed to fight, Yorki's Gamboa. Gamboa had to pull out, so this is kind of a short notice fight for King Tug, Nyambayar, which I also don't think is going to bode totally well for him. And Gamboa, the original opponent for Colbert, has kind of become a former, Olympic gold medalist back in the day, former featherweight champion, 126 pound. Since then, got older. He's now like 40 years old, and he's the guy who they've been trotting out against Gervonta Davis. And then on the DAZN side, they had Devin Haney fight Gamboa, and then they were going to have Chris Colbert back on the PBC side fight Gamboa. So he's become one of those like litmus tests for the guys on the come up. But aside from that, it's going to be interesting to see because, again, they don't have a deep roster at 130 and 135, in my opinion, at PBC. They're not going to put, prospect Colbert against Gervonta Tank Davis. So, yeah, I'm curious to see what they do. But please, let me know what you think in the comments. Like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.